All right, and we're live. Matt Bush, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm excited to be back. This will be
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, no, I appreciate you doing this sincerely. So I loved listening to the last seminar that you did on this topic that we're going to go into. Love the insights that you have. So really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into a lot of the stuff on sleep here. So the neurology of good sleep and brain activation. I thought this was really fascinating because sleep's one of those topics that I think we all know, like, yeah, well, you need to get good sleep. And everybody's like, oh, yes, but still very rarely people do it. And also actually understand the reason why, like what's actually going on in the body, in the brain, about what is actually happening to this. And I thought you did a great job of diving into getting the research about what's really going on between the ears when we do get good sleep and what doesn't, happen when we don't get good sleep. So,
Yeah. I mean, you're great. You're right. It's like, yeah, I gotta sleep better. I gotta sleep better. I gotta sleep better. And I was guilty of that, in my college, university days and early 20s. But then, I think a lot of us go through a situation where, you suddenly get into those late 20s, early 30s. You're like, man, I don't think I can do this anymore.
yeah.
These late nights, pushing through. So anyway, I was motivated to look into this because of our community. And they were kind of asking about this and going, what's the deal? Like, first of all, I don't know. I've tried everything, quote unquote. I've tried everything to improve my sleep and I can't figure it out. And everybody talks about sleep, but what's really going on? So that's where this presentation came from that you were able to watch. Which, by the way, I'm happy to give to your audience. Like we're referring
Mhm.
to it, and we'll cover some of the points, I'm sure, as we talk. But if you're interested in just putting it out there for people, I'm happy to provide that.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I'm glad you started with that because that was my first question. Like, what made you go deep into researching this aspect of sleep? If it was a personal interest or more people are just
yeah,
really confused about like what information is accurate or not.
yeah. I think the conversation actually started for me back in like 2018, 2019, when some new research was published on sleep.
This episode is brought to you by Paluva. Paluva is a new zero drop minimalist shoe with a distinctive five toe design. Paluvas give you the most authentic barefoot style experience, but with sufficient cushioning to use for all manner of everyday movement, fitness, and athletics. I've been using these new shoes in both strength training and my daily walks, and I have to tell you, they are by far the best minimalist shoe that I've come across. The popularity of minimalist shoes have been on a big upswing, but Paluvas are a step ahead of every other zero drop wide box shoe because of the critical feature of individual five toe articulation, a separate slot for each of your toes. This allows for correct dynamic movement of the foot through walking or running, which is impossible when toes are encased in a single box. Now, minimalist shoes have faced controversy in recent years about causing injury from inappropriate use. So the big picture mission is start walking and living in Paluvas as often as possible. Use your specialized running shoes, basketball shoes, work boots, or high heels when you need to, but wear Paluvas as much as possible to reawaken the natural functionality of the human foot to stand, walk, run, and perform. And Paluvas also have a sleek, cool design, so you get a barefoot shoe that looks great as well as feels great. And now you can try a pair of Paluvas with no risk and realize that these are the most comfortable shoes you've ever worn. They are literally designed to feel like you're walking barefoot on a putting green. So you can go visit paluva.com and use a code SC15 for a 15% discount off your first pair. That's SC15 at checkout. Thank you very much. Let's get to the show.
And so I kind of got aware of that, became aware of that, and kind of got into this research and like, okay, there's a little more to this than just it's about memory consolidation or learning or tissue recovery. And so I had gone on a deep dive a few years ago. And then when it really came up for the community and people started asking was actually after the pandemic. So I believe the presentation I did that you were able to see was from about 2022.
Mhm.
So, been in the pandemic for probably 18 months at that time. Most people had been exposed, if not gone through their own infection, and people's sleep was just in the gutter. Like the body, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are really highly affected by viral infection, especially if there's any symptomology that continues after that acute infection period. right?
Mm,
So referring to things like long COVID and whether it's diagnosed or not, I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but what's really interesting is that about 15 to 20% of the population is going to have at least one ongoing symptom after COVID, at least 6 months after their acute infection.
mm,
And they may think, well, my system was just really off after getting sick and it never really recovered.
mm,
Um, so a lot of people don't get diagnosed, and that's fine. I'm not that's okay. But what happens is our sympathetic parasympathetic balance gets thrown off. Many times our brain has trouble like calming back down into that parasympathetic mode, and that makes sleep really difficult.
mm.
So the community around us was going, "Hey, what is happening here? How can I rebalance things? Why is this so important? How do I fix it?" And so that was really the big motivator.
Yeah. It's interesting because was it more of a people were coming to you like saying like I'm not sleeping well, or more it's like I'm not feeling so great because I think sleep might be a factor that's getting caused from it.
Really both. I mean, most people only go on for a few weeks not feeling well before they recognize, oh yeah, I haven't been sleeping.
Yeah.
If they're connected, you know. And so the we had multiple people asking for one-on-one sessions. We had our group calls where they get to actually request topics that we're going to cover, like, hey, can we talk about sleep? Like multiple requests coming in all at the same time. And it's one of those perfect storm moments where like if, you know, 10 or 12 people are talking about this at the same moment, it's got to be affecting more than just those few. It's the vocal minority that represents a
Right.
larger group. So yeah, they were saying I'm not sleeping well. I just can't get to sleep. I can't stay asleep. And also I'm waking up feeling not rested and recovered.
Yeah.
I'm still depleted. I'm still tired in the daytime. I'm stuck in sympathetic mode. Why is my sleep not working? Like why does it feel broken? More
Right.
or less.
Yeah. So when you started researching this and doing a deep dive on it, like you're looking at it from more of a neurological perspective on it. Is there a lot of research out there on kind of the neurological side of what sleep does and why sleep is so important from what's
Yeah,
going on between our ears?
there is now.
Okay.
If you go back before 2018, there's a lot of research published, but a lot of it was inconclusive, or they're taking their best stab at the theory of why we sleep.
Mm,
Um, but two things really came out 2018, 2019. In 2018, I believe there was a lot of research on the glymphatic system, which is how your lymphatics work in the brain itself.
okay.
And I'm sure we'll get to that in a couple
Sure.
minutes, but
Mm,
that gave a whole new meaning and purpose to sleep, that it's the brain's way of actually cleaning itself, taking out the garbage. And that really primarily happens while we're asleep.
mm,
And then in 2019, some research kind of led and cut through the noise about how the body's cholinergic system, produces acetylcholine, and is really responsible and related to the parasympathetic nervous system, is also regulated during sleep.
mm,
So basically, there hadn't been a lot of research in that area, but this system is responsible for things like our learning and memory, sensory and motor processing, the sleep arousal balance. Like, am I
mhm.
tired in the daytime? Am I awake at night? Even emotional regulation and motivation is tied up into this cholinergic system. And they started connecting all of these different functions to the way that that system is regulated during sleep. Going, if you don't get appropriate REM and deep sleep for a long enough duration, this system really starts to suffer. And without enough activation, you're left in this heightened sympathetic state where your learning and memory decrease, your sensory processing, motor processing drops, you get more tired in the daytime, all of the emotional regulation becomes more difficult. All of this stuff was then linked to this sleep as the key.
Yeah.
So around that time, that's when the research really hit, and like boom, like, okay, now we have some traction
Yeah.
to understand not only why we sleep, but also as you dig into it, you start to get some insights into what might contribute to having better sleep.
Right. That
So
was
it
the
kind of all
interesting thing. Yeah, that was in about 2018 was I remember when Matthew Walker, I think, went on Rogan's podcast, which was
Yep.
really popularized, and his book, Why We Sleep, I thought was really fascinating and was the first time I saw like a deep dive debate into quality versus quantity of
Yep.
sleep. Like everybody understands the 7 to 8 hours and like getting that quantity, but actually getting quality sleep is a much different topic of how to perform that and how to build that up. And I realized like, because I was a person who for 10 years was under a constant stress of the work environment that I had, where I was maybe getting, 4 to 5 hours a night of sleep.
Yep.
But as you kind of said, like when you're in your early 20s, like you kind of can, you feel like you can get away with it a little bit more, like you're not realizing the impairment that it's putting on your body. Then
Yep.
you don't realize the difference until then you actually go to the other side and start getting good quality sleep, 7, 8 hours. And you're like, oh my God, like I feel like I just, took steroids. Like I feel so strong. I feel so clear and mentally. It's one of those
Mhm.
things like it's almost you can't recognize it in yourself until you actually get to the other side and experience it.
Yeah. And when it flips, then you go, oh, that's what I was missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matthew Walker's book is great. There's another book that I like to recommend called The Science of Sleep.
Mhm,
And let me find the subtitle of that one. It's Stop Chasing a Good Night's Sleep and Let It Find You.
mhm,
The author of that one is Heather Darwell Smith. What a it's written at a very kind of general population language level, but talks about a lot of the stuff that goes on inside the head and the body when we're trying to
Beautiful.
sleep.
Yeah. So what I
Two
liked
great
about
recommendations.
yeah, what I liked about your seminar is, you started with really why we sleep. It's like asking that question of kind of starting with why.
Yeah.
So with that, like why is from a neurological perspective sleep so important for us? Not just of getting the amount of sleep, but getting good quality sleep.
Yeah. So in the presentation, I talk about three specific reasons. The first is that cholinergic system that I talked about a minute ago. Essentially, better sleep will activate that system more appropriately and in the right amount in order for us to get out of that sympathetic state
Mhm,
and function better, right? Everything improves cognition, memory, learning, motor control, reward processing. Like everything works better when that's more balanced.
mhm,
Um, and it is that idea, like when we're in our 20s, maybe, or teenagers even, we can kind of fake it and, live on a little less sleep. But as we get older, perhaps have a little bit more stress or responsibility, or just go through a different stage of life, like we really need that balance a little bit more. So like that is the first one is keeping that system regulated makes everything we do easier. It's like if you're stuck in sympathetics, I'm sure
mhm.
you guys have talked about this in the podcast before. Like,
Yeah, if you want to explain it a little
sympathetics.
bit more, that difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Yeah, so a lot of people think they hear sympathetic and they've been taught, oh, that's the fight or flight system. And the parasympathetic is the rest and digest system. And that's true. Like that's the names are there for a reason. But sympathetics is not only when we get into a fight or flight. Like our sympathetic nervous system is basically the part of our nervous system that allows us to move and continue to take action physically and keeps us on a higher level of alert, higher level of wakefulness. So it's more active during the daytime, and it's primarily going to be activated anytime we need to move for more than about 30 seconds.
Mhm,
So even if you're walking through the parking lot or going upstairs in your house, your sympathetics are going to ramp up.
mhm,
And that draws back to the energy systems of the body. Like if we were hanging out on the sofa watching a television show or listening to a podcast, and we decide we're going to get up and go upstairs, change clothes, go out for a run, like do some exercise. If our sympathetic system did not activate, then when we were trying to move from our parasympathetics, we've only got about 30 seconds of energy in our tissues that were available to spend, to utilize.
mhm.
Because we're talking about like the anaerobic and glycolytic energy systems at that point.
Right.
It's basically whatever's in the local area. And our muscles, as they create ATP, which is our energy molecule, and start to fire and contract and relax, they're going to burn through those resources really quickly.
Mhm,
So In order to deliver more nutrients, we have to have an increase in blood flow. The way we get increased blood flow is to increase sympathetics. So heart rate goes up, blood pressure increases, respiratory rate gets a little bit faster, so we can take in more oxygen and send it to the muscles that need it.
Mm.
Okay, so when we're awake and moving during our day, our sympathetics are fairly active because we're moving quite a bit, right? Um, as we get ready to actually sleep, we need to come out of that sympathetic mode, get back into our parasympathetic state of our body and nervous system so that we can actually go into that space between conscious and unconscious
Hmm.
that we call sleep. So it's about having sympathetic and parasympathetic flexibility, not getting stuck in one system or the other. Um, so the sympathetic system also just keeps us more alert. Like as we do get into more threat during our day or have a greater sense of danger or stress,
Hmm.
that sympathetic system keeps us vigilant of the environment, of our own body, of what's going on around us, because it does need to be able to respond if there's a threat or a danger that's going to
Right.
present,
Yeah.
right? When we sleep, you can't sleep very well if you're highly vigilant at the same time.
Right.
Like if one eye is open and one ear is constantly tuned to the environment that you're trying to sleep in, you're not going to get into that deep sleep very easily because every little, you know, crack of or groan or blow of wind, like everything's going to wake you up because your
Right.
brain is like listening or watching for whatever's going to happen next.
Right. That's why, I heard that like if you travel, like if you're in a hotel room or even stay at another place that's like uncommon to your normal area, it's
Yeah,
very common to, even if you get a good amount of quantity of sleep, it's not necessarily going to be as quality because your body's a little bit more in a threat detection system. It's a new environment and you're
yeah,
hearing different sounds that's going on, and you can still keep everything constant, but it still can be challenging to get that same quality.
so true. I mean, we spent last week at a Airbnb cabin up in northern Arizona in the mountains. My experience is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Quantity of sleep was fine. Quality was horrible because every time the wind would blow, this cabin would shift and groan, and the floorboards were creaking, and the rafters were making noises, and there's animals outside, I
Mhm.
assume, you know? So I woke up multiple times each night, like, what's that? That vigilant, aware startle. Yeah, so absolutely. Could be hotel, could be Airbnb, could be a cabin, could be camping.
Right.
When you're in an unfamiliar environment, it plays a huge role in that.
Yeah. So when you said like when with the cholinergic system and it's like it's helping with motor function and cognitive, like all these things that are getting better when you do have good quality sleep, is there a metric of one is maybe a little bit even more heightened or get better? It's like is cognitive function even a little bit better than motor function? Is there like a degree or a difference of what even gets enhanced more?
I would lean toward the cognitive functions.
Mhm.
Motor control and motor functions are, well, let's put it this way. Perhaps cognitive and motor benefits of this system are pretty even, but it depends on the person that you're talking to, the individual, as to what they're going to become more aware of. So when I lean toward more cognitive skills that are improved, it's because most people are going to be more aware of that. Like
Mm,
if you're talking to someone from the general population who works in an office or works from home, spends time on a computer, they don't necessarily have a strong habit of physical activity. They may not be as aware of those motor changes. On the other hand, if you're talking with a trainer, a therapist, an athlete, someone who's regularly moving their body and working, like maybe they're going to the gym, they're taking their fitness classes, they're playing a sport, they're going to be a little bit more aware. Like, oh,
mm,
like I'm more fresh when I get to the gym today, or I have better joint control and less joint pain. I have better coordination. I have better reaction time.
yeah.
Those are the motor benefits that people are going to see in the real world. The cognitive benefits tend to be aware by more people because they're like, oh, my memory's more on point. I can find my words a little bit easier. I have better motivation to do the task that I need to complete. And there's actually research on this that's really interesting. So, in studying academic students in regards to their sleep, they found that of the group that was surveyed, 42% of students, so this is active university students, 42% experience what's called excessive daytime sleepiness, which, other than cognitive benefit, the other great thing about quality sleep is you don't get sleepy.
Mm,
But 42% of students have excessive daytime sleepiness. First of all, we're not surprised. Okay. But those that had that, number one, they were motivated more by performance goals rather than mastery goals, which is really interesting to me to think about that
hmm,
because especially on a podcast like this with what you talk about your audience, like mastery is elevated often as one of the things that we're looking for.
yeah.
We're not just in it for the peak performance and then let it drop off the side of a cliff. We want to maintain stable high performance throughout our lifetime, right? So people who have more sleepiness lose sight, I'm going to say they lose sight of that mastery side of the process and they become more motivated by just make the performance, just
Wow.
finish this thing, just get this done. Those people also engaged in more procrastination than students who were rested,
Mhm.
and they had decreased self-efficacy as compared to the people who were not reporting daytime sleepiness. So interpret those as you will, like, and we can translate from the student life into maybe adult life of like, I have stuff that I have to complete in my company and for my job, or I have
Mhm.
to report to my boss, whatever that might be. Like, how much does my sleep affect my procrastination to get my projects done? How much does it affect my sense of self-efficacy that I have the resources and the abilities to be able to figure this out rather than needing help from someone to complete my tasks and responsibilities? So it's just a really interesting conversation how sleep plays into these cognitive things. It's not just about being smarter or
Mhm.
having better memory recall, but it's like, how do I manage my resources? How do I solve problems? How do I ask better questions?
Mhm.
All of those things can also improve with better quality sleep.
So, with this research on the academics, were they looking at specifically their quality of sleep and then like ask the questions about like the goals and stuff like that? Like, was that like like how was that process?
This research is a little older. This was 2006.
Okay.
And so I believe they actually just started looking at it as the entry point, let's say, was more related to sleep quality.
Mhm.
Like the initial questions of the survey might have been, how well are you sleeping on a scale of 1 to 10? Is your sleep
Are
consistent,
you waking
right?
up refreshed? Yeah.
Waking up, the basics.
Mhm.
And then they go on to ask, do you experience daytime sleepiness? And then rate yourself on where you value performance versus mastery, rate
Mhm.
yourself on procrastination, rate yourself on self-efficacy, and then they crunch the data.
Right. That's so fascinating. That's interesting because like I mean from coming from a mindset background on this is I love this topic because the mastery is such an interesting word, right? It's I mean essentially you can break it down as to it's the long game approach
Yes.
versus performance is that short-term external outcome, and when you are focused on that, that often comes to anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's if you're anxious and you're staying in that, that is a form of fight or flight, like anxiousness. It might not be life or death at the moment, but your
Yeah.
brain is probably interpreting it in a similar way, which is very challenging for getting to sleep faster, probably staying asleep at the same time. So, it's kind of the chicken or the egg. What comes first? It's probably a little bit of an amalgam of both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we look at those things like we call it a threat response.
Mhm.
So if you're experiencing anxiety, you're having a threat response. And that would be much more likely to happen when you're more performance oriented. You're not
Mhm.
thinking about the long-term growth. You're like, I got to make this happen right now. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail?
Right.
Yeah, that's going to drive a lot more stress into the system. So uh, in the sense we can say sleep quality is definitely going to have an effect on overall mindset and perspective.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
with the research on, what's going on neurologically with quality sleep, how quickly of a turnaround is it to feel the benefits of good quality sleep? Is it pretty immediate from like a day to a week, or is there a long-term approach to really get into like good quality sleep?
Yeah. So my answer is a little bit different than maybe what you find in some of the literature. There's two different parts of that, like feeling better. One is probably most people have heard the terminology that we can accrue a sleep debt over time where we're not getting enough sleep. And the thing about a sleep debt is it's not possible to make that up in a short term. Like if let's say you were tracking your sleep and you have a really busy week, you end up 8 hours short. You
Mhm.
can't just hang out in bed on Saturday and sleep for an additional 8 hours and make up for that.
Make up the
Doesn't really work
difference.
that way. Okay. So I think of sleep debt as more related to what we're going to talk about next, I think, which is the glymphatic system of how long does it take to actually fulfill the functions and responsibilities of that system. It's not easy for it to make it up in a single day.
Mhm.
So in that sense, sleep debt takes a while to work off or to pay back. On the other hand, what we can experience really quickly within that 1 day to 1 week is feeling a little bit more refreshed on a daily basis,
Right.
having sharper cognitive abilities, feeling more tissue and body recovery in the gym or in our training. Like those things we can get back. Um, and then we can recover from those really quickly. Like you get one really good night of sleep where, some people are now tracking their sleep with an Oura Ring or Apple Watch or a Whoop band, like, oh, I got a 98, which is
Yeah.
amazing. Like I feel so good today. So that's a really short term improvement.
Mhm.
Like, boom, yes, I have some more
It is.
energy.
It's a trap you can fall into though, right? It's like, I
It
mean, I
is.
think all of
Yeah.
us in many ways, I've done that too. It's like, yeah, haven't slept well for a bit, and then you get that one good night of sleep, and you feel like, oh, I just fixed this, like, because I feel great. I got great sleep last night. Even you'll ask people to, oh, I got a great night of sleep last night. It's,
Mhm.
as you said, it can feel good for that day. So maybe it's a momentum builder, but it's not necessarily, you haven't cleaned everything up. It's like if you have a really dirty house, yeah,
Yeah,
you cleaned up one room and it's nice to sit in there, but it's still going to take some other time to clean up the rest of the areas.
exactly. So it you can get that little bump in your performance or in your feelings very quickly, and it can provide some motivation and momentum, but it's going to take a little longer to for the rest of the body and especially the brain to catch up to that.
Right.
So when I work with people on actual sleep quality, it is kind of the mastery versus performance. We're looking for consistency over several weeks. And so it is often about the lifestyle habits and the sleep routine and the hygiene that they're putting into play
Mhm.
that give them that consistent, better quality.
That's great. I think it's a really important message on that. So, going into the glymphatic system, it's the first time I've honestly ever heard that word before when I
Okay.
listened
Yeah.
to the seminar on there. And I believe this has only been like known about for what, the last like 6 to 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. So very current research.
Mhm.
Up to that point, we've been aware of the lymphatic system and the rest of the body for a long time.
Mhm.
And, people think of it, just brief background, we'll just
Yeah.
come up to level playing field. The lymphatic system is regarded as our body's garbage collection system. It's taking out the trash. So it collects metabolic waste, dead cell tissue, dead bacteria or viruses that have been quarantined by the immune system, and basically pulls all that stuff out of the body. So there's lymphatic fluid that's essentially floating around all of the cells of our body. So our interstitial fluid, where our cells kind of float around, is part of this lymphatic system. And then fluid moves toward lymphatic vessels, where it's carried to lymph nodes. And the lymph nodes are where we really clean that lymphatic fluid. And then the nodes will pass the waste either to the kidneys or the colon
Mhm.
so that it can be removed from the body. while the fluid itself gets cleaned and then recycled back into the cardiovascular system, where it becomes basically plasma
Mhm.
as part of our blood. So basically it's like a filtration system of the fluid carries our blood and is part of our blood flow running out to the body areas. The cells pull the nutrients and the oxygen and other things that they need out of the blood. The blood begins to return through the veins of the body back toward the heart. But this interstitial fluid is like collecting all the waste.
Mm.
And it's all connected. It all affects other parts of that fluid system. First of all, before we go to lymphatics, and just in regards to the lymphatic system, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that it's also the delivery mechanism for lipids and fat soluble vitamins to our body tissues. So, water soluble vitamins are absorbed through the intestine, but fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K
Mhm.
are only delivered to body tissues through the lymphatics.
Mm.
So, in the last 4 to 7 years, there's been a lot of attention shown to working on your lymphatic system. And since I'm talking about it, let me give a shout out to Dr. Perry Nicholson. His
Mhm.
company is called Stop Chasing Pain, but he's one of the people who's really leading the charge on how to work with your lymphatic system and why that's so important. So I've taken his courses and really
Mhm.
appreciate his work. Um, but he
How do you how do you
describes,
work how do you work on that? Is it
yeah,
exercise based work or is it like lifestyle? How do you actually work?
it's hands-on
Yeah.
manual therapy that you can do for yourself.
Mm. Okay.
You don't have to see a practitioner, have someone do it for you. You can do it on your own body.
Mhm.
And that's essentially what he teaches over at Stop Chasing Pain, as well as a whole bunch of other cool stuff.
Okay.
But he uses this analogy of the lymphatic system like an aquarium, like a fish tank. And he goes, the fish are like your cells that are living in the fish tank, where they're getting their water and their food from, or not water, they're getting their oxygen and their food from the water that they live in.
Mhm.
They're also peeing and pooping into that same water.
Right.
And so that aquarium needs a filtration system to keep that water clean. And that if that filter gets backed up or clogged or dirty, the water, even though it's still circulating, it stays dirty.
Mhm.
And now, as the fish are trying to get their oxygen or their food, at the same time they're taking in the nutrients they need, they're also taking in toxins from that same water. And
Mm.
if you let that go on, the water gets more cloudy and gross, and the fish get more and more sick until eventually they die.
Gotcha.
So the um, the filtration system on the aquarium, it kind of lives beneath the surface, like it's down inside the cabinet or it's behind the aquarium where you can't really see it. But it's a series of basically drain pipes and filters and waste gathering reservoirs that pull all that garbage out and then return clean water back into the system. And you got to change your aquarium filter every so often.
Right.
You got to clean the tank. And he makes a great point. It's not enough to just skim the top surface of the water, right? Like sometimes in lymphatic work, people talk about skin brushing. Like, yeah, I'm working on my lymphatics. I'm
So I
doing
said
skin
I've
brushing.
had skin brushing before. Yeah.
Yeah, the skin brushing is basically like skimming the top surface of the water on the aquarium.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's not going to fix the filtration that's going on in the background.
Mm.
So lymphatic work where you're really firmly rubbing or vibrating, even slapping these lymphatic node areas and these choke points of the system is where people can begin to start to get that fluid moving again and clean out the waste, get everything kind of back in working order.
Mm.
So 2016 to 2018, this research comes out on the glymphatic system, and they're basically like, this is going to change the textbooks. Like, this is totally new learning that, because they used to think the lymphatic system only goes up to the neck in areas of the face, but it does not affect the brain itself. Okay, like how the brain cleans itself or whether it even needs to was kind of a big unknown.
Okay.
So when they discover this glymphatic system, essentially the way it works is that rather than having lymphatic vessels and nodes in the brain, instead the structure of glial cells, which are like the scaffolding of the brain, okay, that live around all the other neurons. They create these channels where the waste products and lymphatic fluid, and as well as cerebrospinal fluid, can flow throughout these channels of glial cells and glial structures to clean out the waste of the brain.
Hmm.
Okay? And in most cases, they live right next to the blood vessels of the brain. And I didn't say this before. I should have mentioned this. The one difference in the lymphatic system and the cardiovascular system is the lymphatics don't have a pump like the heart. So the way that lymphatic fluid moves through the body is either through body movement, like walking, and in other research, they've actually noted how the gastrocs, the calf muscles, when we're walking, act as pumps for the lymphatic system.
That's fascinating. That's
Okay.
so cool. Yeah.
With like a double pumping system.
Hmm.
So body movement or diaphragmatic breathing are the only ways to move lymphatic fluid.
Hmm.
So in the brain, the glial channels that carry this fluid, this is so cool, they've structured themselves around the blood vessels so that as blood is pumped through the blood vessels, that blood flow acts as a pumping mechanism for the lymphatic system to move cerebrospinal fluid and waste out of the brain and down toward the lymph nodes that are in the neck and at the collarbone.
Wow.
So they're like, this is amazing, like this hidden structure, basically.
Yeah. They found
Yeah.
like an offensive line of the blood cells to like block for them, and they
Exactly.
just
Yeah,
follow through
that's
the path.
exactly what happens. And what's really interesting is that part of the reason they never discovered this before is that when someone dies, all of these lymphatic channels collapse. They're held in place by internal fluid pressure, like fluid
Mm.
dynamics. And so when someone dies and blood flow stops, the pressure decreases and the channels collapse. So they could never see these things during uh, brain dissection.
Hmm.
That's where they were missed. So they had to figure this out with living test subjects, which
Okay.
not sure how that went, but it's super cool. In any case, in the research, what they figured out is that most lymphatic activity happens while we're asleep, not while we're awake. And I would propose part of the reason for that is we change our position relative to gravity. We're laying down,
Okay.
right? So when we're standing, gravity is trying to pull the fluid out of our brain, and our sympathetic system, to circle back to that,
Hmm.
is maintaining adequate blood pressure to keep blood flow up in our brain.
Right.
Okay. And because of that blood pressure and how cerebrospinal fluid is moving while we're standing or seated, there can't be as much lymphatic cleaning happening at that time. So, like 85 to 90% of lymphatic activity occurs while we're asleep. So, when we talk about quantity and quality of sleep, getting that whole idea of getting out of sympathetics is going to let our blood pressure drop a little bit, which encourages more lymphatic movement happening in the brain to clear away waste products, metabolites, proteins,
Hmm.
and to deliver the fat soluble vitamins and lipids that our brain needs, like our A, D, E, K,
Right.
omegas, all those cool things,
Yeah.
right?
So when the lymphatic system is working optimally and we're getting good quality sleep, what's the benefits that we're seeing kind of in a day to day that's really improving a lot when that system's really ramping at a high level?
The the biggest ones are the cognitive effects.
Hmm.
And this is where you get into things like brain fog.
Hmm.
So brain fog kind of disappears, mental clarity increases. Um, you don't feel like you're cognitively moving through sludge, but everything's like sharp and crisp. So language is easier, problem solving is easier. We have greater levels of efficacy with complex tasking.
Hmm.
All that kind of stuff is really what you start to notice, like, oh, okay. And then for some people, they get a clearer sense of sensory inputs and sensory processing. So I've had clients who say their vision has clarified, like
Hmm.
their vision becomes more clear. Their hearing gets more crisp. They experience less episodes of tinnitus or tinnitus, however you want to say that
Mm.
word. Um, Even their sensory input from their body, like tactile sensation, physical touch, pressure, temperature, all of those things become more easily distinguished. And for especially for people who are sometimes highly sensitive, uh, that hypersensitivity sometimes begins to decrease a little bit, and they're more able to manage sensory inputs in their day-to-day life.
Mm.
So really cool connections. Um, Essentially, you can boil all that down and say the whole brain functions better,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And it's interesting to me, like as far as I'm aware, the research hasn't gone to this level. But when we talk about clearing out metabolites and proteins from the brain, there's a lot of neural degeneration type diseases that are linked to misfolded proteins. And it makes you kind of question, well, if the glymphatic system had been working better for the years prior, is there a lesser chance of developing a degenerative disease because those misfolded proteins are not allowed to stay and hang out in that brain tissue,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So,
And with the delivery of fat soluble vitamins and lipids and omegas, like our neurons need all of those things to maintain their structure and their function.
mhm.
And so not, I mean, most of the time people think of those as like your brain supplements. It's like how much better would your brain be able to receive and utilize those brain supplements if that glymphatic system were working correctly?
Like nootropics and like stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
those are speculative questions. We don't have a distinct answer to those yet, but
Mhm.
for me it kind of begs the question of shouldn't that mean I kind of do everything I can to improve this glymphatic function? Like, I want all these positive benefits, you know?
And no doubt. Well, it's kind of, I mean, yeah, some things could definitely maybe make you feel good for a moment to kind of get through a difficult task. But again, it's kind of like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole. Like if you're not looking at these things, sleep is always the most fascinating one for me. It's because it is when you have it dialed in and you really work on that, everything does get better. Like it's from strength wise on a performance base, from a mental and cognitive perspective, from just a mood standpoint of just those swings, just stuff. It really is like it's a
Yeah.
performance enhancing drug when you do get it down. So you had some specific like practices that you were researching of how to optimize the lymphatic system of getting it. What are some of the ways that you can do to improve and get that quality sleep to work on this system?
So, yeah, great question.
Mhm.
Let me just rattle through a few things
Yeah.
that are showing up in this research. Just for better quality sleep, cooler temperatures are recommended in your bedroom when you're going to be sleeping, which is for someone like me who lives in Phoenix, Arizona, that's a little challenging because it's super warm.
Mhm.
So everybody's body adapts to ambient temperature, but cool it off a little bit. Extremely dark room is recommended. In the research on circadian rhythm and sleep, which is a little bit different than where we are right now, but um, how the even one single LED light in a bedroom disrupts sleep quality.
Mhm.
Okay, so if there's an alarm clock or a television that has a blue, green, or red LED, it will disrupt sleep quality from a single LED. Not to mention if there's light coming in through the windows or if there's a night light or any other kind of specific light in that room. Um,
Is there a degree of disruption? I'm assuming like more LEDs are
more
probably going to
LEDs
be
or more
yeah.
brightness creates more problems.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
And the reason for that, just to state it really quickly, is that even when our eyes are closed, the eyeball can still pick up on light in the room, as well as photoreceptors in our skin can pick up on light in the room. And those together signal a network in our brain that's connected to our circadian rhythm and starts to tell us it's time to wake up.
Hmm.
So if you were camping in the wilderness where there's no artificial light, essentially there's only starlight, your body is going to calm into a deep sleep as everything's totally pitch black. And then as the first peak of the sun starts to come up from below the horizon, when it just starts to get light, both your eyeballs and your skin recognize that light and they start to send the chemical cascade into your brain and body to tell you that it's time to wake up.
Yeah.
And so that gets triggered when we have light in the room while we're trying to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you, one of the biggest adjustments about a year ago that I started doing was not having my phone in the bedroom going to sleep,
That's
just
that's a
charging it outside. No joke, Matt. Like it was a week and it was like night and day of just like the difference of quality sleep.
that's a really big one. That's the EMFs from
Yeah.
electronics. Recommendations and research are basically to have nothing electronic plugged into the wall in your bedroom while you're sleeping.
Hmm.
Not a television that's turned off, not a lamp, not an alarm clock, like zero electronics. That might be a little extreme for most people, but at least moving your phone out is a great place to start
Yeah.
because it's so active. Proper hydration and electrolyte balance is on this list. Like drink 8 ounces of water before bed with some electrolytes. We often will get dehydrated when we're sleeping, especially if we're mouth breathing. So nasal breathing, really important. This is where the conversation about mouth taping has become really popular lately. So taping your mouth or training yourself to keep your mouth closed will preserve hydration and improve airflow, but also having that water before bed really helps to keep your tissues hydrated. And then for the
Is that
glymphatic,
challenging for people, like getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom?
well, my take on this is if they're having adequate electrolytes with that water, then that should be absorbed into the body tissues rather than simply passed through the digestive system,
Right.
right? So using either electrolyte packet or some magnesium or some complex salt, like Celtic sea salt, is getting talked about a lot right now because it's highly absorbent for water. Something in that water that's going to let your body absorb it. And you shouldn't have the issue of having to get up and pee in the middle of the night.
Right. Okay.
Or it's less likely, we should say. If there's nothing and you're just doing plain water, it's going to run straight through your digestive system, not be as easily absorbed, and then you got to pee.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liquid
Positioning of
hydration.
sleep you mentioned on there of like the side sleeping versus sleeping on your back or your stomach. One's better for
Yeah.
quality and the glymphatic system.
In the glymphatic research, they're seeing that side sleeping is best for cleaning the brain and activating that glymphatic system. In the very early research, they indicated left side would be better. More recently, they've figured out that right side is a little bit better. I don't know that it really matters,
Right.
honestly. In that particular research, the sample sizes are not huge,
Hmm.
and I feel like honestly, that's something that seems like it could be fairly plastic and malleable depending on someone's overall sleeping habits. But
Why would one position like just show different data versus the other? Is it the position or is there might be other things that are going on with
well,
the
side
individual?
side sleeping does allow the fluid to flow down toward the nodes that are beneath the ear, around the tonsils, and in the side of the neck.
Okay.
Okay, so think about gravity, where these nodes live. If we can put the side of the neck closer to the surface of the bed, it's easier for fluid to flow downhill toward those nodes.
Okay.
If
Makes
we're
sense.
lying on our back, none of those nodes are touching the surface of the bed, so the fluid kind of almost passes by them, and not as much fluid is trapped by those nodes, just
Okay.
because of physics and how the fluid movement works.
Hmm.
So I, in based on what I know about neurology and neuroplasticity and what the research shows on those topics, I would guess that someone's glymphatic system is plastic enough, moldable enough that it can change. Like if they always sleep on their left side, that glymphatic system is probably going to shift to favor left side sleeping. If they always sleep on their right, it's going to favor to shift that side. So in the research with some small sample sizes, I don't put too much weight into right side or left side,
Hmm.
as much as just say side sleeping is better than sleeping on the back for this particular system.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So creating a good, we talk a lot about creating a good routine around sleep. And I think most of that talk is like right at night, like right before you go to bed, this is the routine to get into. But
Yeah.
one of the things I love that you talked about is things that you should really be doing throughout the day to kind of
Yeah.
start with night. And I really like that. Could you explain a little bit about some of the things that you can do just on a like a regular basis throughout the day that will help eventually get to the night?
Yeah. So the first one is the lymphatic activation that we referred to earlier. Um, the earlier in the day that that starts, the better off you are because of how we have to be moving or breathing deeply to facilitate fluid movement in the lymphatic system. If I do nothing all day, I go to work, I sit at my computer, I come home, I have dinner, I sit on the couch, and then at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., I'm like, oh yeah, I got to do my lymphatics. And then an hour later, I'm getting ready for bed. Not a lot of time for that fluid to really move through those nodes that have been opened up.
Right.
So starting earlier is going to be more effective. And you can repeat some of that work during the day, especially before physical activity. Super helpful. So the more active the lymphatic system, the better the glymphatic system is able to function.
Hmm.
Okay. The next two are to actually activate the vision and vestibular systems during the day. So think simple vision drills like eye circles, where you're just following your finger through a big circle using only your eyes, you don't move your head. Or doing a drill called visual saccades, where you're switching back and forth between targets. Like you just hold up your thumbs, spread them out to arm's length,
Hmm.
and switch your eyes back and forth. Those can break the monotony of working on a computer.
Hmm.
And activating the visual system actually does have some connection to the lymphatic system throughout the face. So we have lymph nodes at the temple, at the TMJ area, in the sinuses of the cheek, and mobilizing the eyes creates increased blood flow and fluid movement throughout the face to some degree. Um, Plus, we hold a lot of tension and a lot of fatigue comes from our visual system.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting is that people overwork their visual system because of repetitive tasking or being on a computer, often have increased levels of sympathetic state activity
Hmm.
that's correlated to that. So, moving your eyes in different ways can actually help to relieve some of the tension. The vestibular system, that's our inner ear. It orients us to gravity and gives us our sense of equilibrium. Um, so activating that during the day, first of all, the way I do this with clients is I have them stand. If they're comfortable, they can put both feet together so they're touching, and then quickly rotate their head left and right, tilting left, tilting
Hmm.
right, looking up, looking down. But each head position, they rotate quickly, hold for 5 seconds, come back to neutral, rotate, hold for 5 seconds, back to neutral, tilt, hold 5 seconds, back
Hmm.
to neutral, so on and so forth. Okay. What that is doing, number one, is activating the vestibular system, which can actually increase our posture, our balance, our head carriage, our shoulder position. Like all of that is affected by the vestibular system. But also, this activation and movement of the neck does help to activate and move our lymphatic system
Hmm.
because of where these lymph nodes are located.
Great.
It can also decrease sympathetic activity. Now, this one has to be tested because on some people it increases sympathetics.
Hmm.
That doesn't make it not useful. It just will change the timing of when I would have them do it. Like they may not want to practice that one after dinner as they're getting closer to bedtime
Right.
because it ramps up the body systems, but maybe earlier in the day it could be more helpful.
Gotcha. So as someone who is, I mean, if they went through testing, like this is like, all these things are proven really well. Is this like a few times a day, just like kind of like is that like kind of a good protocol to
Yeah,
work
the
with?
protocol would be like 3 to 4 times a day.
Hmm.
And like each of the things that I'm recommending are probably going to take all of 30 seconds to
Right.
complete, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to do it 3 or 4 times a day. The most difficult part is just remembering to do it.
Right.
So we often anchor it to other activities or
I was going to say
behaviors.
anchor it to another habit that's already built in, right?
Yep, anchor it to something and just get it done.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, multiple times a day is usually more effective than just once
Yeah.
because it reminds the body and the nervous system of what they're supposed to be doing, how they should be functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's I love that point that you brought up on it because oftentimes when we think of solving one thing, it's like all the time around that we focus on. It's like, no, if it's something you really want to build into lifestyle,
yeah,
it's stuff that you do throughout the day that's going to benefit you the most. You know, it's just like training. It's like you can work out for 30 minutes and that's great. But if you don't do anything else for your self-care throughout the day, well, you're minimizing the effect into just these acute results that you get. You attach that to managing stress and focusing on sleep and working on your nutrition. Now, all of a sudden, all the training that you're doing is really going to benefit from it.
yeah,
So it's not just a one-time thing of, yeah, before you go to bed, 10 minutes of deep breathing, and then you're going to sleep like a baby. It's like, no,
yeah.
practice these things throughout the day. If you really want to work on quality of sleep, which I believe everybody should, because it is such a benefit when you get that down. Yeah, work it into the entire routine of the day.
Yeah, have to agree with you there. It's a full day effort, and to increase this efficiency. You can't have a life that's an absolute tornado for 14 hours and then fix it in 10 minutes right before you go to bed.
No
Like,
doubt.
not gonna
Yeah.
happen.
So well, Matt, dude, this is so insightful. I love the research and all the work that you're putting out, just specifically on this, which I thought is a fascinating topic. But the work that you and Kathy have done, just all with Next Level Neuro, I think is so important, specifically for, coaches, especially of understanding this work to work with clients, but really anybody who is looking to optimize performance. I mean, knowing what's going on between your ears and neurology is
Yeah,
a pretty important part. Everything else, flows downstream
everything
from it.
flows from
So,
there. Yeah,
yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing
thank
this
you.
information.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So you got a training that's coming up, pretty soon here. What is that training about, and when can people check it out?
Yeah, so timeliness here, October 15th, we're doing a free training. It's a sneak peek into our mentorship, to give people an idea of what types of information is there that's available, but more importantly, why might you need neurology in your training or coaching practice?
Mhm.
Um, because you just said this, but the truth is our education systems teach us to train people kind of from the neck down.
Yeah.
Like what's up with muscles, joints, connective tissue, motor patterns. But what's really important to understand is how higher order neurological systems, like your vision, your vestibular, your breathing, and yeah, even your motor control, like they integrate to have this major influence on how we carry ourselves, how we move, how we develop posture, and how we perform. And
Awesome.
so October 15th, 11 a.m. Pacific, we're doing a free sneak peek training. It's an actual training. It's not just a sales call.
Mhm.
But I'll send you links and would love for anyone who's listening to check that out. And if you happen to catch the podcast after that date, we always record and offer replay and would love for you to grab that at any time in the future.
Perfect. Matt, thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate it,
you.
brother.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Appreciate
Listeners,
your
thank you
time.
so
Excited.
much. Yep, go check out the links. Make sure you see those in the show notes to grab this training, and I will catch you guys on the next one. All right, peace.